Mindbend, non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
The Department of Consciousness curates intimate educational and experiential gatherings designed to spark self-exploration, facilitate inspired debate, uncover insights, and foster authentic connection and collaboration. Our mission is to bring together individuals from multidisciplinary backgrounds, including executives, investors, creatives, scientists, clinicians, activists, and business partners in the psychedelic wellness and healthcare ecosystems, to push the boundaries of consciousness and create a more compassionate world. Department of Consciousness is led by long-standing psychedelic community supporters, Mike Goldfarb and Jodi Green, who are my guests today on Mindbend. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so the impetus for getting together today, and I've been meaning to connect with you for quite a while, but you were some of the first people that I connected with shortly after moving to Los Angeles who were involved in the psychedelic community at large, which I want to get your definition of that later as well. But you host events, you curate events, and the catalyst for today's conversation was an event that you have coming up shortly, which is a fascinating event. And I want to go ahead and lead with that because I think that'll be a good springboard for us to get into the whole conversation of the DOC and the world you're operating in. So tell us about the event that's coming up next week.
Sure. So our event next week, it's called Be the Drug, Generate Altered States via Human Interaction. So this workshop, we usually partner with facilitators and guides for our workshops. This one's led by Troy Dayton. I met Troy at a friend's birthday retreat earlier in the summer, and it was kind of like Burning Man in the woods, and he led some workshops there, and we connected and had a lot in common and stayed in touch. Fast forward a couple months later, Troy was leading a workshop at the Psychedelic Science Conference called Be the Drug. First time he was offering this workshop. And it was being offered in Deep Space, which was an area of the conference that was more for art and experiences. So when I saw it on the agenda, I thought, oh, this is going to be really cool. I'll go support Troy, check it out, thinking that maybe there would only be, a dozen or, a handful of people there. When I showed up, there were 400 people there. And it was incredible. I keep saying the word transcendent. It was one of the most talked about workshops there. I left just feeling so connected to other people, felt just connected to myself, felt so alive, and no substances were taken. It was all just coming from escalating interactions between people. So shortly after, I followed up with Troy and told him about Department of Consciousness, what we're doing, and that this would be a great standalone event. So yeah, that's what we're doing next week with him.
Jodi, any thoughts to add to that description?
Well, I actually didn't get to attend his event at Psychedelic Science, even though I was there. So I haven't had the experience yet. I can't wait to have it. I think, starting with this makes a lot of sense because it really lays the framework for explaining what we're doing and why. DOC, we really formed this as a way to bring a lot of different groups together, a lot of people together that have maybe different interests and different experiences, or maybe they're completely novice with respect to psychedelics and that ecosystem. And so to have this as a way to bring people together and to experience altered states without using any sort of substance, right? It really creates a safe container for everyone to come in and experience something extraordinary.
I want to read, if I can, just from the event details on the Eventbrite site. I think just to put it into the words that you've laid out here, very succinct. Discover how the person sitting next to you is actually the most potent psychedelic of all. Okay? We alter our consciousness to make contact with the frontiers of our hearts and imagination, to have a unitive experience, and to transcend the illusion of separateness. Join us for a series of fun and deep exercises that utilize each other to reach these states without pharmacological assistance. You'll leave with new cosmic friends. So part of the intention here is to foster community and to introduce people to experiences they haven't had before. I perked up specifically on this event because while hosting the show, I don't utilize psychedelics in a ceremonial or recreational or any other capacity myself. I've been coming at this space for the last few years as a journalist because I believe in a lot of what we're talking about whenever we have these conversations about the veil of separateness, the illusion of separateness, about health and healing, about holistic wellness, about imagination and fostering creativity. The conversation is always appealing to me, and I like that it kind of lowers our boundaries, it lowers our guard on expressing things that are personal, things that are vulnerable. So I'm naturally drawn to conversations and exercises in this space. And I've certainly appreciated that you've welcomed me in to events that you've curated along the way without necessarily needing to participate in that way, right? But this particular event, I can absolutely be there for fully. So let's talk about the actual practices that are entailed, if you can let the cat out of the bag a little bit in advance. Some of what you did the first time you were part of it, and some of what somebody who might be coming can expect.
Sure. And I spoke with Troy the other week, and he was saying that a lot of this could be new material. So part of what he's doing is really reading the room, getting a sense of the vibe and the energy, and curating an experience based off this. So I can share about my experience at Psychedelic Science. It could be different, but just to give a taste, it started walking around the space, making eye contact with people, which sounds simple enough, but it could be scary for a lot of people. That's really intimidating to just hold eye contact with people without looking away.
Yeah.
So just getting more and more comfortable with connecting with other people through eye contact, and then gradually increasing connection through physical touch, putting your hand on someone's shoulder while gazing into their eyes. So just deepening more connection through physical touch, through holding space with each other. And yeah, at the end, we were on the ground. I was holding some woman in my arms, and this is after an hour of doing these types of exercises. So at this point, people are feeling very heart open, very comfortable being vulnerable, feeling safe. And in any point, if you don't want to participate, you can not choose to do it. So I'm with this woman on the ground, and Troy was instructing people to speak to the person how you would want to be spoken to as a baby. So I'm holding her head, and I'm stroking her hair, and I'm saying, "You are so loved. You have so many people in your life who are here for you, who want you to succeed, and who want you to be happy." And as I'm saying this, and I mean it, I'm really speaking from the heart, how I would have wanted to be spoken to, and how I think other people would too. And tears are streaming down her face. I don't even know her name. We've never exchanged any words other than this. And it felt like a psychedelic experience. It felt like just raw emotion, just tapping into this really authentic, empathetic, vulnerable state. So yeah, I think people are in store for some really meaningful experiences.
That's incredible. I attended a shorter, probably, workshop at the Wonderland conference last year. And I found myself in the midst of it all breaking into tears. And I'm learning a lot about myself through my own therapy and through my own medicine work, but I am not the sort that cries. I've learned over many years to hold in my emotion, trained myself to do that, and I'm now peeling away the layers. But to have an experience like that in a group where it is pure raw emotion and you can be vulnerable enough to do that, like, there's nothing like it. It is probably some of the most powerful emotion that you can feel, I think.
It kind of makes you think that we're always capable of creating a new experience. Or we're capable of creating an experience that's different than the one that we're in. You know, I always think about this very vulgar analogy or example of standing up in the middle of a movie theater and just rattling off a bunch of nonsense during the middle of a film, right? That just breaks a moment, right? It breaks all the expectation of a moment. It breaks the decorum. It breaks comfort zones. It's not ideal, but it's certainly a way that a moment could change dramatically with very little effort, right? But sometimes it's as simple as waving at somebody that you're walking past or saying hello, you know, or taking time to ask someone you know a question that you might not normally ask, or sort of changing operational procedure a little bit, right? So if we can set up these safe spaces to experiment that way, I think you're probably looking forward to what the integration or the long-term effect might be. Talk about what you envision as where do we grow from this type of activity?
I think I just want to touch upon something you said about the moments, and it's something I think about a lot, is how, you know, you can go to a medicine retreat in the jungles of the Amazon, or go on a 10-day Vipassana and have really rich transformative experiences, and those are very meaningful and significant. But if you come back home and are a jerk to your family, or, you know, have a short temper with the person who's, you know, bussing your table or whatever, what was the point? It's all about the micro moments. That's the real spiritual work. It's how you're carrying yourself moment to moment when you're not on medicine, when you're not on a retreat. That's not going to say it's easy, but that's the focused time to do the work. But the real work is how you're living your life day to day, at the office, with your kids, in the car. And most of those times you're not on medicine, you're not on a psychedelic. So this is the real stuff.
And the parallel is that when someone is undergoing, say, ketamine treatments, for example, with a certain goal in mind, if they're in a solid system of support, they might have tools for integrating that experience. How do I apply what happens to me on my session day with what happens to me in the next 48 hours, in the next week to 2 weeks, right? So what might that look like? You know, if we have this experience where we get out of our shells and we're interacting differently, what was it like for you, Mike? Like, how did it alter your perception immediately after that moment? You're in the habit of, or in the practice of, maybe accessing these spaces more than somebody else might be, but this particular ceremonial space.
Yeah, it heightened my empathy. It heightened my compassion. It made me feel more connected to people I didn't know, people who are different from me, realizing that at the end of the day, we're all more similar than different. So we can focus on the minor things that set us apart, that are divisive between us. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, pretty much. We all want to live a meaningful life, have purpose, have meaning, have connection, and no matter where you are in the world, that's what brings us together.
I think there's a fair amount of people who, if stumbling upon this podcast and hearing it or watching it on purpose, might feel a sense that that's hippy drippy, wimpy drippy, to have those kinds of thoughts. But I always feel like vulnerability is a more robust and strong attribute of a human being than it gets credit for. Looking into someone else's eyes requires fortitude, emotional fortitude, physical stamina. It's a trip, right? And it's just something that we don't do that often. So I'm always excited about. I like the term mental fitness too, and a lot of the conversations that I've had with people of all different backgrounds, we talk about not necessarily optimization, but developing and working on our own mental fitness. How do we accept the moments as they come to us, whether we're in any kind of medicine training or whether we're just working with our emotions on a meditative basis? How do we accept these moments? What's our reactive mind? And when you're working on generating your empathetic capacity, that's a strength, right? So you formed, and before I forget, anybody listening to this, if they want to come to the event on the 26th, you've made a code available, correct? A discount code that they can use, and it's MindBend. So if you find the link on Eventbrite, and I'll tag it into the podcast, you can use the code MindBend for 10% off. So thanks for putting that together. you have decided to put together this container called the Department of Consciousness. And it's the only one out there to my knowledge. So let's talk about the mission statement. And in doing that, I'd like to know a little bit about your backgrounds each, where you're coming from, and why you see this as part of your overall mission.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and lots of stories to share. I think that, from my perspective, I'm an attorney. I've practiced law for 13 years. And I think for me, coming out of the pandemic, it was a realization of this extreme feeling of loss and disconnection, that I was not just feeling it, but everyone around me was feeling it. And this sense of needing to find a purpose. And through my own healing and the work that I was doing, it occurred to me that being a corporate lawyer and, slinging around billions of dollars to help large companies make more money wasn't a really gratifying way to live. And I wanted to find a way to channel my energy into something that felt meaningful and purposeful, but also joyful. It was as though all the joy and fun and beauty of my life had been sucked away. And I think maybe it was just this existential dread, right? Like that we all felt after the pandemic, that being able to come together and meet like-minded individuals for me was a catalyst for change. And I wanted to be able to replicate that for others. And like I said, the experience that I had at a similar workshop as the one Mike mentioned that we're going to be doing, being able to get in touch with my own vulnerability and to share that with others, I realized that was probably the most powerful thing that I could do. And so when Mike and I first met, we talked about wanting to do this and to recreate these experiences for people where they could have a safe place to connect and share their experiences and be vulnerable and try new things without fear, right? And we're often wearing these professional veneers. Our titles, right, become who we are. And we do, eventually realize that we're actually, bifurcating our humanity in some ways, right? Like we're the lawyer, or I was the lawyer, but then, there was a different part of me that was me at home, the wife, and there was the part of me that was the sister and the daughter, and, the joyful, loving, fun person that really wants to go connect with other people. How do we bring all of these people together so that we're not just out in the world acting like robots? So that for me was really the impetus for wanting to create DOC and make room for everyone, within my professional and within the psychedelic community to come together.
Mike, you want to share a little background?
Sure. Yeah. So I've, aside from my own personal explorations of psychedelics, which began in college, I started getting involved in the ecosystem about 10 years ago. I went to my first MAPS event in 2013 and just became more and more curious over time, started hosting MAPS fundraiser events. I started going to conferences, started just becoming more connected to the community. I'm a Zendo volunteer, so I do psychedelic peer support at Burning Man, which is a gratifying experience. And, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not on the front lines with helping others through their mental health challenges, but it's an opportunity to provide support at a time for people, which could be very disorienting and challenging. So I am very grateful that I get that opportunity. And I've also been doing some work in the space. I was recently consulting with a venture capital firm that invests in psychedelic companies and other conscious businesses, along with working with some other mental health tech startups. But really the piece that's been missing for me was the community side, and going to conferences, and that's a way to tap into that, and that's great, and they're awesome. But having community in your city, in your home, is missing. And there's, we live in Los Angeles. There's so many people in this ecosystem, from investors, entrepreneurs, attorneys, filmmakers, people in media, researchers, scientists, therapists, and nothing that's really bringing them together. Because like what we were saying in the beginning, we're all more similar than different. We're all in this space for a reason. So when I met Jodi almost a year ago at a mutual friends event for people in the psychedelic space, we were chatting and saying, this is great, this is fun, but this is kind of like a one-off thing. Like we should start hosting these. So shortly after, we hosted our first event and didn't really have any agenda or plan. It was just, let's just bring people together. And we brought a lot of people together across the space, and there was no speaker or anything. It was just like, hey, come connect, let's have fun. And what we noticed at that first event was the types of people who are coming all have something in common. They all appreciate and value vulnerability. So the types of conversations that I was having at this event with people I had just met were just very authentic and deep. And I think that's something that's beautiful about the people that come to our events and people in this space, is that they value that. So shortly after that, we were like, let's be intentional about this. Let's curate these experiences that really foster this. So that's what we've been doing ever since.
Let's drill down a little bit more into that idea of shared interest, or you're coming across vulnerability on a regular basis. What else could you say that people are interested in who are coming to these spaces? Where are their minds and hearts? Like, let's really drill into that. Like, what brings people into this space? Why the interest in being vulnerable? What's the energy behind these containers?
Well, I can speak to a few things. I think, like Mike was alluding to, and you were at our first event.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you experienced it for yourself.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm
community
sure
feels good. I mean, it's nice to be,
Yeah.
it's just nice to find people to hang with in an atmosphere that feels supportive.
Right. And non-judgmental,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't the sort of atmosphere where with many conferences you walk in and there's this mode of immediate commercialization or profiteering, right? And there's, we follow this sort of rote way of handling ourselves in those sorts of situations where it's like, oh, let's exchange business cards. Who do you work for? What do you do? I think for our events, like what struck me, and I think what struck many of the people that attended, was there's none of that, right? I think for the first event we hosted, I'm not sure I even asked half of the people what they did at all. We ended up getting immediately into deep personal conversations. Why are you interested in psychedelics? And people are sharing their stories, which are often very deeply personal. And I think that's what makes the difference. I mean, really that drives the vulnerability, is people being able to have that safe container to share, and having the right people there to do it, right? We just have such a lack of that in our culture overall that it stands out as being unique for that reason.
Yeah, and psychedelics are still, for the most part, illegal. A lot of psychedelics are Schedule I drugs, and being able to talk about that openly with your experience, it's you have to be in a safe place to do it. You have to feel comfortable to share that, because if you do it at work, potentially that can have consequences with you. In certain social settings, it's still very stigmatized. So yeah, the safe container is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to make a point just so that everyone is clear, right? DOC does not provide or host events that use substances, or illegal substances for that matter. We want to make room for everyone. We want to make sure that we're following the laws. That's important to us. It's when Mike first alluded to the fact that we formed DOC and there were not a lot of similar organizations out there. There are organizations out there and community groups within LA and other places that do host events that might use substances or, come closer to the gray area. But we wanted to, have that line be very clear for us and for the people that attend our events. In part, it's important to me because being still a professional leader in the community, I'm an attorney. I have ethics rules that I'm bound by. And a lot of women come to me that are unfamiliar with psychedelics, where they've maybe seen my posts on social media, they've heard me say things, and they're curious. Making room for those people, right, is really important to me because we want to spread this message as wide as possible.
Mm-hmm. Safe to say that it's an incubator for discussion, connection, building the mycelial network.
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we have an opportunity today. I mean, this will be up hopefully for time immemorial, but we will, let's take the opportunity. You're both very involved. You have full professional lives and full lives of commitment to this space. Let's paint a little picture of where we're at, like legislatively in the country right now, and maybe share with our audience a little bit about discussions you've had with people who are in a position to potentially influence legislation or commerce or anything that would shape the landscape when we talk about the psychedelic industry. Overall, what are some telling moments that from your recent history in terms of looking ahead in the space?
Well, I get asked quite often because I am an attorney and I do counsel business entities in this ecosystem. Where are things legal? When, they want me to read the crystal ball and predict when will psychedelics be removed from Schedule 1. I think starting there is a good point, right? We're still dealing with largely almost everything being on Schedule 1. The great big change maker in the very nearest term is the fact that MDMA, assuming we all agree that that's a psychedelic, pathogen, whatever we want to call it, is about to come off probably of Schedule 1 and be rescheduled when it gets FDA approval. And that will be huge. We also have 2 states that have legalized in some shape or form psilocybin, that being Oregon and Colorado. And Oregon service centers are now up and running where people can go and have a legal psilocybin experience. Of course, it's legal under state law and still federally illegal, which makes it very complicated for business entities to prosper. So that's a challenge. But change is coming, right? I don't think we're falling backward from here. We are definitely moving forward in a really exciting direction. It feels like a renaissance to me. And I am so grateful to even be alive at this moment where we're seeing the tides turn and people's minds are changing about what to do. Unfortunately, California is one of the states that has not gotten on board yet with psychedelic legalization or decriminalization. Your viewers probably know that Governor Newsom just vetoed a bill that would have decriminalized certain psychedelics. So that was, unfortunate. But we do have other opportunities on the horizon, including the TREAT initiative, which is gathering signatures right now. And if we gather 1 million signatures, it will go on the ballot next year. And that will create a $5 billion research fund, which would be obviously invaluable. So it's exciting times.
I'm glad I asked because as a lawyer, you're familiar with many areas of this world that I'm just not. I don't have access to that information immediately. Sometimes you seek it out and you find it, but it's not just about legislation though. It's about ethics around it, and it's about like the intention. Tell us about some anecdotes you've experienced recently in terms of like projecting into the future and how you see the landscape being shaped and what's integral to doing that the right way.
Yeah, I think a big part is education. I think there's so much stigmatization already, or stigma, around psychedelics for various reasons. And I think there's this perception of good drugs and bad drugs. And if drugs are illegal, they're automatically bad drugs. Meanwhile, there are legal drugs that are killing a ton of people that are being overprescribed and overused around the country. So I think there's going to be a lot of education that needs to happen in order for some of these compounds to be successful and really have more healing potential.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the space that I've been fortunate to find myself into, just being able to even have a forum like this, to be able to have conversations like this. Some of the most rewarding moments for this effort for me have certainly been when guests who have come on the podcast have shared with me that they've been contacted through people through YouTube, or they've given their email address or their Instagram account, and people have reached out and they've been able to share resources. Mm-hmm. I think that's the overall. We're at that time where the education is really having the discussion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is it's what you're doing right here. It's interviewing people. It's normalizing these conversations and demonstrating that to be using these substances, you don't need to be You could be a professional. You could be a professional lawyer or business person or, any upstanding member of society and still use these, have benefit, use them responsibly. And doing so shows other people like, oh, I could do that too. It's not just, oh, the, dregs of society use drugs and upstanding citizens are, stone cold sober. I think there's a lot of gray area, and it's all, showing people what this can look like.
What keeps you optimistic or hopeful, or what keeps your heart open on this topic when we see legislative measures fail and when we continue to see confusion around the topic or stigmatization, like you alluded to? How do you think you see the needle moving in positive ways? Because it gets frustrating, like with so many other policies, with so many other phenomenon in the world, like it's the same destructive pattern repeating itself over and over and over again. What gives you cause to think that is capable of changing?
I mean, I think I always go back to the science, right? It's demonstrating efficacy. It's hard to debate science. And I think what we're seeing with MDMA for PTSD, it's that on people both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats are supporting this initiative. And it was really remarkable at the MAP Psychedelic Science Conference. On stage with Rick Doblin, who's in charge of MAPS, was the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, who's as liberal Democrat as they come, sharing a stage with former Governor Rick Perry from Texas, who's as conservative and right wing as they might be. And Governor Perry was saying how he doesn't agree on every other topic. He's on the other side of the aisle from Governor Polis, but with psychedelics, especially to treat PTSD with the veteran population, he's staunchly supportive. So this is one of those rare bipartisan issues that's gaining bipartisan support or getting support from both sides because of the efficacy, because the science is demonstrating that this does have real long-lasting potential to cure or relieve the suffering of a lot of mental health indications.
I want to ask you some word questions. So the Department of Consciousness, this is an abstract softball, but tell me what consciousness means to you, Jodi.
I had a feeling you were going to ask this question.
Really?
Hate to be so rote, but we kind of got to go there.
Interesting. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, to me, consciousness is everything that is around us and within us. I mean, we are more than just this physical form, right? And I think the more that I've explored my own inner states, I don't know that words are even the right vehicle for explaining what consciousness might be. One of my favorite quotes that I heard from a judge at one point was, words are an imperfect form of communication. And that's why when we host events with DOC, so often we want them to be experiential because we communicate in so many ways that are better than using words. So that's a polite way of me deferring the answer to your question, because I'm not sure that I can actually define that in words.
Yeah, well, that alone in its way is a definition, right? that which cannot be defined by words, potentially.
Indeed.
Yeah. Mike, can you take a stab at it since you were
love
prepared?
that explanation. I'm definitely not as prepared to offer anything much more substantial than that. But I guess it's the word that I like, the concept or feeling that I come back to is connection. It's connecting to something higher than yourself, than just your baseline reality. It's alignment. It's feeling whole. And again, yeah, it's hard to put into words, but it's something that you feel. It's something that feels elevated than just how you're living your life, kind of day to day, but really seeing the beauty in the mundane, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The name of the podcast is Mind Bend. The subtitle is Non-Ordinary and Extraordinary States of Consciousness. So we'll be accessing non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness in the next workshop without a psychedelic trigger necessarily, although psychedelic states of mind can be reached through the work that will be done. So I'll go another definition, and hate to bore you with it, but I'm always curious. Psychedelic, what does that term mean to you, Mike?
I mean, literally it's, mind manifesting.
Yeah.
So, altering your reality, seeing things differently. And that could be achieved through working with plant medicine. It could be achieved through breath work, through dance, really shaking up the snow globe of your mind and putting yourself in an environment, a mental state that challenges your norms.
That's beautiful. And aligns with the quote on our website, which is, when I let go of who I am, I become who I might be, which I've always loved, right? We're so tethered to this concept of who we are, right? Which is usually one part of ourself that we go through daily life embodying, when in fact there are many parts, right? Like there are many different pieces of who we are that, the idea of consciousness and exploring psychedelic worlds, to me is about finding all of those pieces, right? And how do they connect? How do they connect with us and with the universe, right? Like everyone around us, right? Like we're all connected in that way. And so I think it's bigger than just the self. It's this interconnectedness and finding that.
We've used the term in the conversation so far, ecosystem, psychedelic ecosystem specifically. Let's drill down into that a little further as well. When we're talking about an ecosystem, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about connection again, right? Like to go back to that, I think I don't like to use the word industry in connection with psychedelics because it feels wrong. It just feels kind of dirty, right? Like to me, it sounds like mindless profiteering as opposed to mindful connection, which is what we're doing, right? Like in an ecosystem, we're helping each other. We're being supportive. We're co-creating. We're collaborating. We're learning from each other. That's what this is, right? We're part of a whole. We're one being, in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also acknowledging that there isn't just one voice in this space, that it's not just, oh, we're all, paddling in the same canoe going forward, that there are different interests in this ecosystem. And, the ecosystem is kind of a broad term, but yeah, there's, researchers and scientists and activists and people who are for decrim and people who are for legalization. And, they're not always on the same page. So, part of what we're doing is bringing different voices to the table.
Yeah. Where else have you found that different voices are coming together and having exchange even when they're not on the same page? Are you privy to other spaces that are being facilitated? I know there's like outliers or different factions or different, you're always going to have differing opinions, right? And sometimes in this space it can get heated, right? So are there other platforms that are bringing voices of different opinion to the table to have productive discussions, to your knowledge?
I'm sure that there are. I'm sure there are others out there, but to me, one of the things that was really important in forming DOC and doing the work that I do through my legal career is being open to all those different voices. I don't like to draw parallels to the cannabis industry, but I will, only in part because people often draw these comparisons between psychedelics and cannabis because of the way regulation has developed. But that community was always very polarized. It prevented a lot of the reform that could have gotten done federally because there are different factions within the community about, needing certain things to be in place in order to move forward. And I'm seeing a lot of the same thing in the psychedelic world, in that there are a lot of competing factions. There are, like Mike said, there are people that only want decriminalization. There are people that only want regulation. They only believe this should be federal. And then there are, we have the states doing how the cannabis industry first developed, sort of state by state, with their own reforms that might all end up being different. It creates a lot of confusion and a lot of infighting. And of course, there are indigenous communities that feel undermined. And we have to be very mindful of that too. As someone who is not part of that community, I want to try to be as open as possible and understand what they're going through. it's hard to do, right? Because we are like naturally sitting in different worlds. But it is important to foster this collaboration and try to bring people together, because I don't want to see psychedelics kind of fall by the wayside in the same way that cannabis spent, however many years we are in now, and we don't have any sort of federal movement.
Yeah.
It's very disappointing, right? Like, we can do better.
I think another concern that people have is the mainstreaming of psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it is, more underground, and a lot of these substances are Schedule 1, and it is still kind of a smaller ecosystem. But over time it's going to grow. And with more substances becoming legal, more people outside of this community are going to have access. And I think that's a good thing. I think, it's kind of going back to the 60s, right? When Timothy Leary and, others were, calling people who did psychedelics counterculture. Well, when you call something counter, then it's against something else, right? So I think there is this fondness for, psychedelic culture, and I'm certainly a supporter of that. But I think in order for this to be widely adopted, and why that's significant is because we're in a mental health epidemic in this country. There's tons of people who are suffering from various mental health indications, and psychedelics could be extremely promising for providing relief to that. But a lot of those people aren't going to be, quote unquote, into the psychedelic culture, but they're going to be qualified patients, right? So I think it's important to not be dismissive of other people coming into the space who might not kind of fit the description of a psychonaut, or, for whatever reason they're different. But really this is medicine. A lot of this, it holds healing potential for people. And I think that's really what needs to be stressed as this continues to develop. It's not just us versus them. This could be for everybody.
Yeah. And while not a therapist yourself, you definitely have like caregiving impulses, right? Like taking care of, facilitating, holding space, being a confidant or whatever in those challenging moments. I haven't really talked about the Zendo project before on the podcast. Could you speak a little bit more about what that is and your role in it?
Sure. Yeah. I don't work for Zendo. I'm a volunteer. But I've volunteered with Zendo 3 years now at Burning Man, and they are, they used to be part of MAPS, and they recently split off. So they're their own entity now, and they provide psychedelic peer support for people who are having difficult experiences. They also provide peer support for people who aren't on psychedelics. They're just having a challenging mental health experience. So at Burning Man, half the people that come to Zendo aren't even on a substance. Maybe they took a substance the day before. Burning Man's a very overstimulating place. There's a lot going on. Brings things up for sure. So I think it's kind of like an oasis there. And at other festivals and events too, where they're set up, people can come to Zendo, drop in for however long they want. It could be 5 minutes just to take a few deep breaths, lie down, get some water, relax, or it could be hours. And I've sat with a spectrum of different people, from just sitting and holding space for a few minutes for someone to full on crisis intervention. And it's a really beautiful experience to be able to give back in that way. And what's also similar to hosting our DOC events, I've met wonderful volunteers at Zendo. So, a shift is usually anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. And when you're not sitting with someone, you're hanging out in the tent waiting for people to come by. So it's, learning people's life stories and what brought them into the space. And most people doing it have a connection to the psychedelic space. So yeah, it's a wonderful community, and very proud to support it.
If neither one of you are comfortable doing this, don't worry about it at all, because I'm putting you on the spot. But maybe you'd be comfortable with helping illustrate something that's come up for you and work that you've done, and how the community at large, or peers in the space, or different modalities have helped you move through experiences that could have been more difficult without those kind of support in place?
That's a great question. You
And it's
did
definitely
put me on the
it's
spot.
definitely putting you on the spot. And if you're not comfortable, don't worry about it at all. But like I think sometimes it's good to hear specifics about this was part of my life and this is how it's changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I will say is every day I meet people that inspire me, and it's because I have been able to share my personal stories and be vulnerable that inspires them to in turn be vulnerable, and then creates this circle of trust, right? Like this beautiful space where we can be open regardless of where our paths might have led us in the past. And I have those interactions all the time. I take calls from random strangers. At least once a week, I have somebody reaching out asking questions about what's going on with psychedelics, or, I want to learn more about, treatment for PTSD or postpartum depression. I have a lot of women in my network that reach out to me, professional women that don't have anywhere else to turn. They don't know who to ask. It's uncomfortable for them. It's not within their community.
Is that through the Women in Psychedelics network?
Women in Psychedelics network. I'm also a member of an executive group called Chief, which is not a psychedelic group. It's a large national organization for women in VP and C-suites. So people who are taking on a lot, right? Like founders and CEOs and people with a lot of responsibility within their companies, where talking about psychedelics isn't a comfortable place, right? And for me, what's been really moving is what I've seen in response to my sharing, and being able to share my story, and then in turn give them the room to share theirs, and that to me is really the most profound experience that I've had.
Anything you'd like to share, Mike?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about a DOC event that we hosted that offered that experience. We hosted a group ketamine journey under the supervision of a doctor. So, ketamine's a legal psychedelic, and we worked with a company that does ketamine concierge services. And we intentionally curated this experience for 7 people at a beautiful space, this beach house in Venice. And lots of people have had access to ketamine, and they've, gone into clinics and had experiences. Most of those people I know have done it as just solo, just going in by themselves. We wanted to offer a group experience, coming back to this idea of connection and being able to offer that in a way where you're not just going through this journey alone, that you have other people, maybe they're going through different stuff as you, but you're all holding the space together. So we brought this group of people together, and also wanted to bring in ceremony and ritual into the experience. So it's not just, okay, I'm going into the clinic and I'll get a shot of ketamine and have my experience. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And I've had very profound transformative experiences going into a clinic by myself, but just wanted to do something a little different. So, with lots of other plant medicines, there's a lineage associated with it, right? With, ayahuasca and mushrooms. For a lot of people though, I would imagine that might not feel totally aligned to their values or their background. And this is coming back to making psychedelics more inclusive of people, not just in the hardcore psychonaut space. So we wanted to create an inclusive ceremony for people to come together. So we worked with a ceremonialist and created some rituals and group exercises to bring people together, not in an overly woo-woo way, but in just a very grounded, here we are, let's hold space for each other kind of way. So we had this experience. Everyone was receiving IM, intramuscular ketamine, together. And we had an opening ceremony and then a closing ceremony at sunset. And I was also on the experience as well. So I, kind of was going back and forth between being a participant and also trying to steer the experience to some extent. But we were in this beautiful space, and there was a rooftop deck, and we're right on the beach. So after the experience, I told everyone, you're welcome to stay for another couple hours. If you want to go up to the roof and journal, you can do that. You can walk out to the beach. If you want to hang out in the common area with the group, you can do that. And I was expecting, more people were going to probably be more internal still and want to just be on their own. Everyone stayed in the common space. Everyone wanted to connect and share about their experience and hold space for each other, which I was surprised and was also just thought it was so beautiful that this group of people who were all strangers before felt so connected to each other.
Yeah.
After the experience, we facilitated group integration circles. So we split up the group and had different integration circles with them. And just as another opportunity for people to stay connected and share, because stuff comes up after the experience. So it was just another example of just reinforcing how important community is to the healing process.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of community, thank you for sharing. Will there be chapters of the Department of Consciousness throughout the United States? Is a plan for regional chapters or state chapters? Or right now, if somebody wants to be involved or investigate, the events are in Los Angeles, but can they participate, remotely, or how do you build the community outside of LA?
I think you're writing our 5-year plan, Matt.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten there yet. We started this sort of ad hoc, as we mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Starting with small groups in our own home, kind of expanding and testing the waters and seeing, gauging the interest. And there has been a lot of interest. And I think that we do have, expansion plans could be in the works. Certainly, we're going to be launching a newsletter and hope to be sharing more things through social media on all of our sites, right? So that's a way for people to stay connected, at least for now, in terms of, launching in other locations. Not on the horizon yet.
Got your hands
please
full.
come visit us in LA.
Sure. The departmentofconsciousness.com.
Department of Consciousness, know that. It's like Facebook.
Okay.
No more the.
Got it.
Yeah.
Departmentofconsciousness.com. The event is coming up on Thursday, October 26th, 7 p.m. As I Am.
As I Am Yoga Studio in Santa Monica. Mike actually teaches there.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
We've done some yoga talk here before, too. That's another state of consciousness, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I've been wanting to have this conversation with both of you for a while. I hope you felt like we touched on some of the more pertinent components of what it is that you're trying to do and help share the messaging. And again, that discount code is MindBend if you want to check out the event on Thursday, October 26th. Look forward to continuing to attend your events and being a part of this dialogue with you.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Yeah, it's been great to have you from day one in our community. And almost a year after we met, you're interviewing us here. And I'm such a fan of your work and what you're doing. And so grateful to be here with you.
Thank you, my Goldfarb, Jodi Green.
Thank you.